Hey peeps, welcome to another video. Today it is part 3 in the new look 6560 sew along. Today we're burritoing the yokes and sewing the bodice together. So let's get started. First thing it wants me to do is stay stitch neck edge of front, yoke front and back. So I have just sewn together my yoke fronts to their respective lining pieces. So I'm going to class that as stay stitching those. So I'm going to now stay stitch the front of my bodice and then the neckline of my back bodice, and then it wants me to gather forward shoulder edge of front between notches. So I'm going to run some gathering stitches in there as well. Before I can stay stitch the neckline, I need to mark on my dart, and I like to do that by snipping into the legs of the dart and then putting in pins so that I can fold it back and use my friction pen to make marks where the points of the darts or the middle of the darts are. And then I'm going to do the same with this one up here. The other thing I like to do is I take my French curve and I use the curved side and I kind of work out which part of the French curve is going to line up best with the dart itself. And I found that if I've got the 11 inch mark on the center point of the dart, that works really well for both of these legs. And then if I flip that on its head, that also works really well for the top part of the dart. So once I have marked all my points in, I can then go in and draw in the lines matching up those points so that I can sew these darts with ease. The other thing I want to do is make sure that I have clipped in all of my notches, which I've done. So you want to make sure you transferred all your markings over from your pattern piece. I'm jumping around again. I've moved on to step number 3, which is to make darts in back with right sides together, bring broken lines together, matching small dots, stitch a long broken line from wide end to point, press dart towards center, stitch front to back at shoulders and side seams. So I have pinned in my darts and I marked them as I have told you. So I'm going to start at the bottom and back stitch, sew up and all the way to the point and then sew off the end. You don't want to back stitch to the point of a dart, you want to sew off the end and secure your thread by tying knots in it. This will help your darts not be too pointy and puckered at the ends. So I'm going to get both of those done and then I can sew the yoke to the front piece and then sew the shoulder seams and the side seams together. So I've sewn my dart and I've left, as I said, I've just sewn off at the point. So I have a nice long thread tail and I'm going to tie that into some knots to secure that. You want them to be secure but not, you don't want to pucker the end of your dart, so you want them to be flush up against the fabric but not making the fabric pucker in any way. So I've got my knots there and then I'll just trim off this excess and I'll do the same for the other dart, and then I'm going to press this dart to the center. So I'm going to do the same for the other dart and press them into the center. So I'm going to go back to step number 2, which is with right sides together, pin front yoke at forward shoulder seam, matching notches, pull up gathering stitches to fit, baste stitch and press seam towards yoke. I've got my front pieces gathered, I've got my yokes there. I'll get those into place and show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is the front neckline, this is the armhole. We have the there's a notch on the yoke piece, which you can see here. So this is the neckline part of the yoke, and you can see they've got the two notches here, and that's where we're going to put our gathering sections into. So you want to flip this down so that it's right sides together, pin the two edges, pin the notches, and then pull all the gathering so that it sits between those two notches. Okay, so me being me, I have added another layer of difficulty, or another layer of fabric. I have decided that I am going to burrito my yokes. Again, if you've watched any of my tutorials, you'll know that this is a preference of mine. So I have the right side of the outer yoke to the right side of the outer bodice. I have then pinned that in place, and I have also gathered down the gathering between the two notches. And then I have pinned the remaining lining piece, lining yoke piece, because I have cut 4 of these rather than 2. I have pinned that with the right side to the wrong side of the bodice, sandwiching the bodice as it were, and I'm going to sew that at 5/8 of an inch and press everything up into the yoke, and that's just going to allow me to burrito the yoke and make sure that all of the insides here will be nice and cleanly finished. So I have sewn the yokes on, and now I need to remove the gathering stitches. When I do gathering stitches, I do them 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge and then another 3/8 of an inch away from the previous line of stitching, which means that the gathers are in between, the stitching line itself is in between where the 2 gathering stitches have been run, and I just find for me that gives me really nice gathers. So I am going to hopefully remove, let's just snip that as well. Remove the visible line of stitching, gathering stitching. You want to double check that your fabric will tolerate having stitching removed from it and that it won't leave any marks. Usually this is easier than this. There we go. So yeah, it won't leave any marks in the fabric itself once you've taken that line of stitching out. This one is particularly good and recovers really well, but again, you want to test that on a piece of fabric before you run stitches where they will be seen on the final garment, because if you have fabric that does not recover well and puckers like some silks can, then you're not going to want to do your gathering stitches like that. So I'm going to trim off the rest of these threads, and then I want to press everything up into the yoke. So I'm going to press that up like that and this up like this, and then I can sew the back panel or the back bodice piece to the outer yoke, and we can then burrito the yoke itself. So I've pressed everything up into the yoke. I have sewn the back panel onto the yoke as well at 5/8 of an inch, and again I've pressed that seam up into the yoke, and I have it laid out so that I have the yokes, the lining yokes floating free, and then this is the front and then the back, and I've got those kind of all lying on top of each other nice and flatly. So what we're going to do is from the very bottom we're going to start rolling our entire shirt up, and this is so we can get to the yoke that is attached to the front piece. So this is the one that we have interlined, and we're going to take the free floating lining yoke and we are going to match up this edge and we're going to pin it into place. And when you're pinning, you want to be careful that you are not catching any of the shirt into the stitching line, and we're going to match up the notch. So once you've got this all pinned, and again you want to double check that you've not caught any of the shirt in your pinning, what we want to do is we want to sew across this line of stitching that we've previously got here at 5/8 of an inch, which will attach the inner yoke to the outer yoke, and that will finish off the edges nicely. And we're going to do exactly the same with this one here. So I've got the yoke that's attached to both the front and the back, and I've got the lining yoke here which is free floating. I'm going to match up the notch and pin all the way along here, and again making sure that you are not catching any of your shirt fabric in the stitching line. That's very important. And we can then again sew this one along this previous 5/8 of an inch stitching line that we've got here, and that will finish off our yokes on the lining. So the important thing is to make sure when you reach in that you haven't got any of your shirt fabric caught into where your stitching is going to be going. So I'm going to get those both stitched at 5/8 of an inch, and we can then turn the shirt through. So I have sewn these seams, and now you want to very carefully reach in and pull your shirt through towards the center. So I'm pulling it towards the front neckline that way, and I'm going to turn that through, and then fingers crossed if you've done it right, moment of truth, make sure nothing has been caught. You should have a nicely finished like this. So obviously I need to give this another little press, but we have one this side and one this side, and then that's nicely finished on the inside as well. And again, you can see here why I interlined this fabric to begin with, because that's hiding all of those seam allowances that I have going on inside of here. If it had been sheer, you'd been able to see all of those excess seam allowances there. So I'm going to go and give those a press, and then I'm going to sew up the side seams of my shirt with French seams. Of course, I am French seaming my side seams, so I have sewn them together, wrong sides together at 1/4 of an inch. I'm now going to trim that down to 1/8 of an inch, press the right sides together, and then sew at 3/8 of an inch and press that seam towards the back. And I've done that for both side seams. I have finished the French seams at the side, so I'm going to press these towards the back. If you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comment section down below and I will do my best to answer them for you. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you again very soon.